Hey guys, welcome back to UAP Studies Podcast. We are recording this, I believe, at the end of October. I was going to say November, the end of October. So it's full swing for fall right now, which is I'm absolutely in love with this fall. It's perfect. It's exactly the way it should be, just perfect and chilly. But let's find out from Michael and Katie from your ends. Michael, we'll start with you first. How's it going over there with your fall and the flooding?
It's going great. Yeah, we've gotten a lot of intense rain here in South Carolina. Not as bad as some other places around the coast, but the temperature is lovely. I've gotten to lounge by my pool and be cold instead of lounging by my pool and being hot all the time. And in the professional life, I just dropped an interview with Garrett Graph, the journalist, Pulitzer Prize finalist for his book on Watergate, and he wrote a book on UFOs. The interview is over at the Anomalous Review podcast, just me and him. So if you want to go give that a check, it was a really fun conversation. A little dry, but journalists tend to, come with a lot of facts and stuff. So yeah, it's been a fun season. How are you guys?
Doing good, doing good.
Yeah, I've been doing pretty good. Katie, why don't you take it away? Let us know how you're doing over
I
there.
think Jason is in November because he's all ready for the holidays. I
Yeah,
think you're excited.
yeah, yeah. I'm ready to get Halloween over with. I mean, are already advertising Christmas stuff, right?
Right. That's true. So early. Doing good, doing good. Today's a beautiful 75 to 80-degree day, and tomorrow's forecasting snow. So
Incredible.
trying to enjoy this last really nice day. Getting ready to head to New Mexico, do some research at David Marler's Historical Archive Center, so UFO Historical Research Center. They just did the ribbon cutting for that. So I'm looking forward to looking into those original APRO files and digging some more on the ranch. I want to encourage everybody. I'm actually in process. I hope to drop it tonight, but it's going to be the most intimate, personal episode I do on Rocky Mountain Ranch Research with Katie Page YouTube channel. And it's about behind the scenes for season 1 of Beyond Skinwalker, where I get super personal and I share behind the scenes footage and photographs and my personal recordings about how I was feeling. And so it means a lot to me. So I hope you guys can go over to that channel and subscribe and check it out. So that's what I'm up to. Everything's doing good.
And I will second that.
Happy to
Definitely
have
go
been
check
here.
out, Katie's podcast and her show on YouTube, because she actually goes out in the field, investigates people, investigates the actual location, which is more than what I do here. So obviously support Katie, as what she's doing is educating us on how this process is done. Now, our guest today is Mr. Ben Moss. Now, if you're familiar with the UAP UFO subject, you've been following it for some years, you've obviously been aware of Ben Moss's work. He's been everywhere. He's been a guest researcher on Netflix, the History Channel, Hangar One, Discoveries, NASA's Unexplained File. He's been everywhere. He's been interviewed, and he's an expert because he's been doing this for, I think, over 27 years at this point. Ben,
Probably longer than that.
longer than that. We'll
Yeah,
say 27. It's 27. You're
giving
still
away
young.
my age.
Yeah. But so Ben is coming to us from the States, of course. He's good friends with Katie and some other friends in the field. So I always want to have Ben on. Of course, now we have the opportunity. And Ben also happens to be an author and researcher who co-wrote this with a good friend of mine on the Socorro Incident, which of course we're going to get to in a little bit as well. But Ben, welcome to UAP Studies Podcast, my man.
Thanks for having me. Nice to see everybody.
So my first questions, I'll kick it off. What I'll do is I'll kick off with questions. Michael, you go next. Katie, you're next. And we'll just do it that way. Makes it a lot easier. So my first question to you, Ben, obviously we always get into this subject because something is either shock and awe in our lives that open up the door. So holy crap, this is real. Or you eventually seep into it over time. It becomes apparent that obviously there's a situation. I'd like to know a little bit more about your background and exactly what got you into this topic to begin with.
Well, initially, I'm pretty sure it was the Walter Cronkite special I watched with my father like many, many moons ago. I think it was in black and white. It was that old, but that was a Walter Cronkite special on the news about UFOs. And it was fascinating to see because it did show us a couple of interesting things. And then as a big comic book collector, I started when I go to buy my comics at the store, I'd pick off any UFO magazines. And I remember one of the magazines, and this happened at Fort Meade, showed a black ring in the sky. It was just like 5 successive photographs, and then the thing filled with smoke and became a cloud. And I thought, well, that's the neatest thing I've ever seen. I was probably 14 or 13 or younger than that at the time, but I got interested in it. And then when there was, I believe, a couple of cases hit the national news, Travis Walton case and some others that got me more interested. But finally picked it up in the 90s when I joined MUFON and became a field investigator and then chief field investigator. And, it's one of the most fascinating things you can study because it's so complicated and so strange. And the more you learn, the less you know. So it's just one of those subjects that, you're on one side or the other. You either believe something's here or you don't think something's here. And the evidence keeps weighing towards visitation to me. And then as I dug into the Roswell incident, I realized that that's exactly what it sounds like. It was a crash of. What's funny is we were talking about an egg-shaped craft. The escape pod from Roswell was egg-shaped, where the beams were found at the second crash site. But that's what got me. Walter Cronkite got me started, and then I just went from there, and then I just sort of absorbed everything they're in search of with Leonard Nimoy and Unsolved Mysteries and all the great TV shows. Sightings was a great TV show. They're better than most of the shows that are on now. It's funny how we kind of went backwards on that, but yeah, I've been interested for a long time now.
Excellent. We lost Michael, so.
Yeah, I guess you're next. Yeah.
I'll take the question. Speaking of TV shows, I mean, you did Hangar One. I'm curious to know which case on Hangar One was your favorite case that you talked about.
The one with the train that hit the object was really, I wasn't real familiar with that. And I thought that was pretty fascinating. And I did more research on it when we were talking about it. But that was a pretty cool case because you had a lot of witnesses. You had these objects that were interacting with a train, which is very unusual. It's not the normal type things. Right. Sorry, I'm still fighting a virus. My worst, I'm glad I wasn't on the episode. The worst one was the guy on Mars. I just totally blanked that episode out because I felt the show was going so well, and I thought we took a step backwards with the guy that dreamed or was on Mars. And I don't know if you remember.
We all have that. Don't watch that particular one. Yeah. Forget about that one.
Yeah, that was a trip because when we filmed that, it was out in a medical facility, a big hangar, and people were saying, "Hey, over here's a box of Michael Tyson's medical records," and there's all kinds of weird stuff in there, and it supposedly was haunted. And yeah, that was my first foray into TV shows and behind the scenes and how all that works.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it's a different breed altogether because I find if they're trying to push in a certain narrative, they'll push the guest like, hey, what about this? Or they try to feed you what you should answer as a question. And that happens, unfortunately, but then that ruins the credibility of the investigator, I find. So we should be a lot more stubborn now, especially being on shows like saying, no, I'm not covering this, or no, I don't want any part of this story, because that would poo-poo my reputation quite fast. And in this field, your reputation is everything. And the minute anything happens, that's it. Your credibility goes down. So that's the problem with these shows is they're always pushing a narrative or an angle towards it and not really documenting it, I think, the way that it should be.
Yeah, definitely. There's some things I wouldn't say for Hangar One. I refused. I was on another show. I won't mention it because he's a friend, but when we took readings at the Socorro site, they got, the Geiger counter went off, and I said, this is volcanic rock and you're going to get uranium. And they cut that part out of the show and used the positive Geiger counter reading as evidence that the radiation was still there. So that, sometimes it's out of your control. You film something, you think it's going to be one way, then it comes on TV another way. And if it makes you look worse, what can you do?
Yeah, that's why even like the Skinwalker Ranch, for instance, that one I have a hard time with, is just because it's always chasing something. as to now they're really finding anything. And sometimes there's a narrative there that, like I said, most shows have them, but I like it when there's not so much. It's more of a documentary explaining things as opposed to actually having a narrative like, is this a threat? And we've seen the threat narrative come all the time, or they're friendly aliens and they're here to bring us to unicorns and cotton candy, which of course is equally absurd as far as I'm concerned. So, yeah, I was going to ask you. So you start looking into the Socorro, New Mexico case, and I will show a map to our audience as well because we were just looking at the vicinity of where all this took place. But this was 1962, and
64.
what was it? 61 or 62?
64.
64. I'm sorry, I have 62
Right.
stuck in my head. So 1964, and it happened within the vicinity or close to the Trinity site where they would detonate these test bombs, nuclear bombs, before they dropped them on Japan. And of course, we know that somehow in this vicinity, a craft crashed in New Mexico, which you were just talking about, Roswell, and Corona, I think, is the name of the region, Corona, right? Um, and then since then, we've heard more about Jacques Vallée's case with Paula Harris. They're saying that 1945, same location, an egg-like craft similar to the Socorro incident, which we're just going to go into, crashed there as well. So I want to get into the Socorro case and how you got involved in it, and then how the book come about with the investigations you've done.
Well, it started when I had met Tony Angiola, and we decided to go to the 2014 MUFON Symposium in Cherry Hill, New Jersey. And James Fox gave a presentation, and he showed some footage of Ray Stanford talking about Socorro. And I remembered at that time seeing a movie, a film on TV of a tourist that her family had stopped in that area right after the event and filmed the location where the Socorro craft landed. And so we got a hold of James after his presentation, and I said, look, I'm going to find this footage and get it to you. Of course, that was a whole nother process. It was much harder than I thought. We ended up writing 2 articles for the MUFON Journal back to back, the search for the lost Socorro footage. But I called all the places, all the different production companies in the UK, and it seems like the ownership of this footage was all over the place, and everybody wanted money. And then eventually, another researcher said, "Look, I recorded that," and so he sent the CD to me, and then I had the footage. But that's what got me started on it. Then the head of MUFON at that time said, well, you should meet Ray Stanford because he lives in the state next to you. And Ray was the original investigator there, besides the Lorenzes, with Dr. Hynek had invited him down to the site in Socorro in 64. So we met Ray Stanford, and then we really got into it. I'd read Ray's book, Socorro Saucer in the Pentagon Pantry. And so Tony and I started looking to see if we could figure out if there's any other explanation for this. And that ended up, we were on Kevin Randall's show, which is kind of weird how things work out. He ended up writing a book after we were on his show about Socorro. And I'm sitting there going, oh, man, I should have done that first. So eventually I just wanted to go ahead and put this together with Tony because I kept hearing that, people were saying it was a lunar lander, it was a student hoax, and all these wrong theories. So I wanted to dig into it. And I've been to Socorro 4 times now, and that's what got me going. I wanted to figure out what really happened there. And you can tell from the title of my book, Not of This World, the conclusion I came to. But the more we dug, the more evidence we found that what Lonnie described, what Lonnie Zamora, the police officer who witnessed this, described, is exactly what happened.
And just for the sakes of the listeners who are not familiar with the story, could you give us a rundown of what the events were?
Yeah, there was it began when the police, it was I think El Defensor Chieftain or maybe the police dispatch got 3 calls from Albuquerque from 3 different people saying there's something with a blue light or a blue flame is heading towards Socorro. And then there was a gentleman that stopped by Opal Grinder's gas station and said, you got some weird aircraft out here. And Opal asked him, what are you talking about? He goes, well, this thing almost hit my car. And he goes, was it a helicopter? And the guy said if it was a helicopter, it was the funniest looking helicopter I ever saw. And he said, but then I saw it kind of almost hit my car and went away. He didn't really describe it. It was with his wife and 3 children. He said, I saw a police officer going after it. So Lonnie, who was on random patrol, a speeder went by him. He was aware of who it was, 17-year-old kid that was in Socorro. So he knew most of the people there. Lonnie, a real soft to the earth police officer, a real honest gentleman. He started going after this guy, but staying behind him a little bit when he saw a blue flame or heard a roar that went over the road he was and was heading towards the desert. So he took his brand new police car, it was like 3 weeks old, took 3 tries to get up this hill, went up this hill down into the Socorro Desert. And as he's driving along this road, which is really almost impossible to drive on, I can't believe he actually got his car up there. He looked down. He thought at first he saw an overturned car or overturned airplane or something, but he saw an egg-shaped craft as he kept driving, looking out the left side of his window. He saw it was about 16, 18 feet long, about 5 or 6 feet thick, but on landing struts, it was on 4 landing struts, and there were 2 beings looking up under the craft like there was maybe some kind of problem. Yeah.
Just showing the pictures there for the listeners. If you get a chance to see this on YouTube, just a quick sketch of what he saw.
Yeah, and it was actually the egg was kind of this way, not on its back. And the symbol is more that. You're close.
Nice.
But so he looked down and he saw these 2 beings that were looking up under the craft. And there's these creosote bushes in the area that don't grow very high. And they tap out at about 4 feet. And they were exactly the same size as this creosote bush. So as he drives around and then comes around a bend where he loses sight of them, when he gets within, once he parks his car and gets out, he's about 35 feet from the craft. But he sees this craft, he sees a symbol on the craft, he hears 2 slams, like it reminded him of a tank where you have an inner and outer hull door slamming. So he heard 2 slams. The craft started firing up a blue flame out of it. There was this winding noise. Lonnie kind of hit the dirt because he thought this thing was going to blow up. And then he turned around and looked, and this craft had lifted up off the ground. The blue flame that was knifing in the ground was not a propellant-driven flame. It was wasn't real hot. It was a little bit warm, but it didn't burn Lonnie like if it was a rocket, it would have. And lifted up and then hovered there for a minute. The blue flame cut off, and then it started accelerating towards the Perlite Mill area, I think southwest or northwest, I believe. I'm not great with directions. But then it almost reached, supersonic speed as it was leaving, but silently, the blue flame was gone at that point. And so that he had called dispatch. Sergeant Chavez showed up, who I think saw the craft, but didn't want to tell anybody he saw the craft. But Lonnie had a pretty good look at the 2 figures. He described the 2 figures as had white coveralls on, but I'm pretty sure he got a look at their faces. And being a devout Catholic, he could see from what he saw that these were not humans. And it pretty much freaked him out. He spent a couple of hours that night talking to his priest about what he had seen. But here's a guy, probably the best witness you could have, a police officer, never thought about UFOs, didn't really care about UFOs. He relays this story. Sergeant Chavez said he'd never seen Lonnie so scared. He said he looked a little pale, which is tough when you're of Hispanic descent. And it changed his life. He was never the same afterwards. And I believe it's because he thought he had seen demons, and that's why he went and talked to his pastor for 2 hours that night, trying to figure out, trying to reason out what he saw. And his pastor told him, his priest told him, said, Lonnie, you can stop talking about it, or you can just tell the truth from this point forward. But it changed his life. His family said he was never the same. He became much more quiet. And it was, broad daylight, seeing something like that, it would freak anybody out.
100%.
So I just interviewed Garrett Graph on a different show that I do, and he wrote a book on UFOs, the sort of government angle for it. And he's kind of a skeptic. He didn't in the end come to necessarily believe in the way that a lot of us do, but he cited the Lonnie Zamora case as probably the most convincing that he had come across when he was studying this topic, as somebody who didn't come into it having already known a lot. And I think that he points out that Zamora doesn't ever seek attention for it. He doesn't start like speaking at UFO conferences. He just goes back to being, he was like a cop for the rest of his life, right?
He left the police force because of the ridicule. You know, he was the UFO officer. He worked at a gas station for a while, and then at the local town dump, I believe. But he was really frustrated by it all. He later in life he said if he could do it all over again, he would never have said anything. And he wasn't treated that well by the FBI and the investigators. They kind of grilled him and told him to stop talking about the creatures and don't talk about the symbol. But yeah, it changed his life. It was one of those things where, you know, somebody had no interest in it at all. And his story never changed over the years. He never embellished it. He said he was sick and tired of the, you know, getting calls from other countries and wanted to do this and that. And he said, I'm disgusted with it. His latest interviews, he said he was just done. He did very few interviews, but towards the end of his life, he would call them the creatures, which gives you an idea of what he knew that they were. He didn't say humans or small childlike figures. He said the creatures. So he never really cashed in on it. He didn't want fame. He didn't want any of that. He was just a perfect witness in the fact that he was a very honest man, but he didn't really talk about it a lot. So his friends knew not to ever bring it up. He would talk about it if he wanted to, but you never would question him about it and grill him about it. But yeah, he never changed his story, never cashed in on it, never turned up on it. He was on Unsolved Mysteries, I believe, and maybe a sightings, but he didn't do very many interviews. He was just done with the whole thing.
How many people actually witnessed? I know there were the witnesses at the gas station. Do you have a number exactly? And does he have any children? And do they talk about it, or would they be willing to be interviewed on that or anything like that?
Yeah, his daughter, Tony and I interviewed his daughter, and I've spoken to her several times. She actually, he didn't say a whole lot. I think he told his daughter's son more than anybody else, but it was one of those things where you really couldn't pry that hard. I shared a lot of the information we had with her, and it was tough. I think the one interview that we all wish we could have had was the priest, because I think he told the priest more than anybody what had actually happened when he was trying to reconcile the creatures he saw. You know, was this something evil, or, you know, am I losing my mind? That kind of thing. But there were when we were in Socorro, we kept running across people that said, yeah, a friend of mine said he saw it down by the reservoir. It landed near the reservoir. Sergeant Chavez saw it, but he would never tell anybody because he thought it was a black project and would get into trouble if he talked about it. There were multiple witnesses to the audio of the roaring. And then there's a whole chapter in the book that puts together all the articles about egg-shaped craft seen in the area at the time. And when we got the files from Rob Mercer, who bought the Blue Book files on Craigslist, it was 280 pages of documents. And the Army, the Air Force, and the FBI had gathered all these newspaper articles about it. They were very interested in what happened, and would bug the investigators years after trying to find out what happened, because the story continued with the landing in La Madera that, you know, hopefully we'll get some more info about that. Same type of craft, same landing gear, same impressions. But there were multiple witnesses in that area at that time. It landed at Hollerman Air Force Base. Police officers saw it. Army personnel saw it. There were apparently photographs that were taken of it that were sent to Lonnie, but Lonnie's house got robbed and all the pictures disappeared. So it's one of those things where if it was a one-off story, sure, no big deal. But when you look at all the newspaper articles at the time, this thing was seen all over the place. And in the 50s, you had you know, a case similar to that, Leavittsville, or I can't remember the name. And
Leaventsville, yeah.
Yeah, and it was a
Or Leavenworth, maybe.
200-foot egg-shaped craft. But it's a very unusual shape, you know, and as I have spoken before, you know, if this thing was moving very fast, it might look like a tic-tac. So, you're not far off from a Tic Tac type shape when you're talking about the articles are saying butane tank, football shaped, bathtub shaped, all trying to get the idea of this elliptical craft, which is what Lonnie saw. It was elliptical craft, 4 landing gear with the symbol on the side of it. That's that symbol there, which Ray kind of agreed that we maybe thought it was a radiation symbol because the inverted V pointed to where the blue flame came out. The 3 bars might signal radiation, meaning, don't stand here when this thing engages or it'll cook you. But that's all speculation. We just know that the symbol was obscured. Captain Holder he was the uprange commander at White Sands. He told his son and other people that he made up the symbol, had Lonnie sign it, because if anybody else saw this craft, he wanted them to report the real symbol, the inverted V, if they really saw it. But if they reported the umbrella with the arrow, they were lying, because that's the symbol he made up and had Lonnie sign, as a patriotic duty. But Captain Holder had a really good interview on, I believe, I can't remember if sightings or unsolved mysteries, but he was confused, and he said, years after the event, he kept getting calls from the Joint Chief of Staff and people saying, "The heck was that thing?" So they were very confused. They were very worried, and they put a lot of resources into trying to figure this out. And the case is still an unknown today in the Project Blue Book files.
Isn't this a case that turned Dr. J. Allen Hynek around?
Yeah, he's formed CUFOS not long after this. He was baffled, when he was asked, "Can't we just say it was an hallucination?" He goes, "An hallucination doesn't put, 4 indentations in the ground of a craft estimated to weigh 9 tons and doesn't burn a creosote bush in half like the blue flame did." Now, these creosote bushes are very resinous, and for a flame to play over it briefly and slice one of them in half and fuse sand together, you're talking about a very exotic propulsion, some type of plasma or ion beam or something, but not a chemical propellant.
I feel bad for cops because they're not trained for this. Like, they're trained to handle human scenarios, the worst human scenarios. But when you're saying, like, hey, you might be the first one on call of an alien landing, like, I mean, I don't think they're prepared for this. And specifically not 1964. I think this is what, 1 year before the Betty Barney Hill abduction. Well, that's 65, wasn't it? So yeah, this is something that I could see as a police officer. You don't think this is an alien craft. You're very curious as what it is, but it's round. Like, as far as an aircraft requires propellers, and like a helicopter just made no noise. I could see the shock and awe in him. But when you were mentioning about how he had a hard time coping with it, I find that seems to be more prevalent in males, having a hard time to come to terms with seeing entities or having an experience than it does with females. Females tend to fare better, even if they have, an abduction where there's, even sexual reproduction where they take the fetus every 3 months. They seem to somehow handle that better than males do. You remember seeing Whitley. He was really, really like traumatized, almost to the point of like, PTSD at that point from his experience. And I found that to be more of the case with males, that it shocks our reality to a point where I think it's probably because as a male, you're supposed to protect, you're supposed to be able to control certain things. And with that, you can't control it. So it scares the crap out of us. Do you have any theories? I know this is weird questions, but do you have any theories as to why we do that?
Well, in Lonnie's case, he was a very religious man, and what he was witnessing kind of goes against the word of God, I think, to him. And so that played a big part into his, changing his life, because as a religious man, a devout Catholic, if he thought he saw demons, then he might have thought he was marked for something bad, or, was something really, something just totally outside of his realm of knowledge. As a police officer, you think you know everything. You're going to run into situations that you're trained to deal with. But this was just, it would freak anybody out. But if you're a very religious person, it definitely makes you wonder, why me? And I think that was a big part of what bothered him, is why did I witness this? And he wished he had never talked about it. But yeah, it's just one of those things where I don't know if I've never actually delved into women versus men handling it better, but we know that women can take more pain than men. They're usually more level-headed than men, so that could be part of it right there. But I think religion plays a big part in how some of these people react. And I believe Whitley Strieber was a fairly religious man too.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's like a Gurdjieff follower or something. Like he's part of a, I don't know, not a cult, but the kind of strange religious movement. What's your like going theory on what these things are? I mean, I know the extraterrestrial hypothesis is sort of an easy go-to, but do you have a more like specific kind of idea of why those things appeared in the form that they did, and the place they did, and the time that they did, or where they came from?
I think it could be several things. You can't rule out interdimensional. You can't rule out extraterrestrial. It could be a combination of many things. I mean, this was more of a nut, kind of like Roswell. This is more of a nuts and bolts craft with beans, and not these what a lot of these cases are, where it's just really, really strange. I think that there's life everywhere. So I think this is just one civilization. This is what they look like. This is the kind of craft they had because of the multiple sightings of egg-shaped craft. And it was kind of in a wave at that time. Maybe they're just passing through the solar system on the way, through space to another solar system. The fact that some scientists say you can't get there from here doesn't make any sense when you think of if this civilization is 1,000 years ahead of us, or 50,000 years ahead of us, or 500,000 years ahead of us. If they're way older than we are, way more advanced, then we wouldn't even know they're here if they didn't want us to. But I think the only reason this happened is this craft was having some difficulty because it almost hit the car that had the family in it. And I don't think any UFO would want to take out a family and become national headlines. And then it landed in the Aurora, and the Socorro, where it landed was kind of a depression. So once it settled down there, unless you were close to the rim, you wouldn't see it. So I think they were trying to repair the craft. And then a couple days later at La Madera, the craft landed there and was on the ground for 5 or 6 hours. So I believe it was having some difficulty, but this is definitely a nuts and bolts craft with beans, probably from who knows where, but I would say extraterrestrial. But you can't rule out, the more you learn about physics and reality and the universe and multiple universes and vibrational states, it could be so many things. You couldn't rule out time travelers. I think this was ET, but you can't rule out other dimensions and things like that. I think string theory has kind of gone out the window now, but it postulated up to 28 different dimensions. So who knows? I think our solar system is fairly young. Our sun is fairly young in the age of the universe, which is 13.8 billion years old, they think. But as we go further out, there's still more matter out there. I don't think the universe had any beginning or end, which nobody can wrap their head around. But because we're a young universe, a young solar system, I think that there's a lot of life that's figured out how to travel great distances and can do what we do, see a sun with planets in the Goldilocks zone, not too hot, not too cold, has water, carbon dioxide. And so they just run around exploring things and checking these places out. We're a great study. I don't think they're here to save us or anything, but they could just be watching us to see if we survive ourselves.
Kind of like the James Webb telescope. I mean, it's taken amazing pictures, but imagine you're a race that's thousands of years ahead of us. They could zoom right into your planet and probably see the grass growing on it. So, to think that it's impossible for any other species to be that far advanced is, I think, really considering how many billions of galaxies that are out there. I think it's almost stupid to say, well, are we alone in the universe? Should be the stupidest questions we've ever asked as a species. Should be that. I think the more we realize how big this place is and how small we are, our place in all of this. Even recently, I found some people are saying, well, what if we're seeded? What if life is seeded on planets by different entities? Does that take anything away from us? No. But if that's our history, we should know that. if that's what the plan is, we should know that. And I think that's what disclosure is about, is saying, look, I know there's going to come a lot of scary bits with this, but we're all in this together, one way or another. It's not, we're not facing this individually. We're facing this as a society on this planet. And I think that's the biggest problem, is now trying to convince people that should know better. They should know by now what we're dealing with. And even we got the congressional hearings that are taking place on November 13th, fingers crossed. And they're bringing forward these military personnel that for the first time, Gaudet's supposed to be there, Tim Gaudet, which we'll talk about the underwater. And they're even saying that there's bases underwater. I mean, this is the first time that we have this much information sort of coming forward in this year. I don't know about you guys, but I think this year we've had a lot come forward, not just with the Lou Elizondo book, but just in the progress of saying, look, these guys are trying to block us. And now we're naming these companies. You know, Michael Schellenberger's article came out and he named all these special departments that are all in charge of this. I mean, now their dirty laundry is all coming out. They try to hold this back for so long. And, you know, there's a gentleman we're having on soon that's talking about catastrophic disclosure, meaning if you hold it back only so long, eventually it's just going to spill. There's nothing you can do to contain it anymore. So, but in 1964, we were far from that. And for a guy like him to be mocked and ridiculed at work, because nobody could fathom that in 1964. We weren't even thinking about alien abductions in 1964. That didn't really start till what, Betty and Barney Hill the following year. Nobody was ever reporting the little guys yet, and yet he did. These guys were no more than 3-4 feet tall, egg shaped, which of course we've seen before. I just wonder how much space there is actually in that craft. Like, is it bigger on the inside than the outside? So like a Harry Potter tent thing, you know? Because you hear that some crafts are really large on the inside, really small on the outside. But when I hear about this and I hear about the other police officer, I think in the 1970s, that crashed into an actual saucer or craft that was in the road. He thought it was an illusion or something, but he actually crashed into it. And now we have physical evidence, like an actual collision from a vehicle to a flying saucer. And yet we never talk about that. I wonder if they've ever taken that car and examined it, for instance. Lonnie's car, did it have any radiation, any evidence?
There was radiation at the site when Ted Jordan showed up, another officer. He had his camera with him. He took a bunch of photographs, I think 18 altogether, but he turned those in, of course, and never got them back. And the word was that the pictures were fogged by radiation. And when Tony and I were seeing Ray Stanford, he has a film of an interview he did with Dr. Hynek, where Dr. Hynek admits that the film was indeed fogged by radiation. But the next day, the radiation was gone, which is very unusual to have a half-life of a day. Usually it's thousands of years. So very interesting, you know, and the fact that they didn't want to release the images if it was fogged by radiation just tells you that they were worried that this was going to blow up in their faces. Because imagine the FBI who told everybody, don't say we're here, but nobody can come up with an explanation. And that's just not something that they want to, you know, have in a press conference. So we don't know what it is. We don't know how it got here. It's here. It's doing things to people. It's violating our airspace, but we're clueless about it. They're not going to tell you that.
Yeah.
Didn't they have pictures of the footprints, or did they cast the footprints of the beings or anything like that?
Yeah, there was where they were standing when Lonnie saw them was near. There were two round indentations that looked like a ladder had come down, maybe a metal ladder, and those were kind of smudged, which is what would happen when two beings come down the ladder and put a little weight on it. And then there was a couple of these horseshoe-shaped prints that were only about 2 or 3 inches, you know, really small feet. And they were right around where Lonnie had seen them. And, you know, they jumped back in the craft and took off. So there were some footprints, but they were very peculiar-looking, childlike footprints. And then, of course, once the town found out about it, it got overrun with all kinds of people. There were, you know, the footage that we found had 30, 40 people walking around poking the bush and disturbing everything. So they did put the rocks around the 4 indentations, which were wedge-shaped indentations. But you know, Dr. Hynek had estimated this was a 9-ton craft, and it came in at an angle and left at an angle, which is interesting.
A 9-ton craft that could just hover above the ground and just take off, and a 9-ton craft.
Yeah, with a
That's
thin
crazy.
blue flame too. So, I think the blue flame was a secondary engine that probably wasn't used except in emergencies. And I believe this was an emergency because they had to go, they landed in La Madera later to repair this thing. But the key is that thing cut off and there was no engine. There was a wind down sound, and then the thing just silently flew off without the blue flame. So it had two types of propulsion, whatever it was, in that vehicle.
Just for the listeners, I am showing a map right now of the Los Alamos sort of Trinity site where they set off the bombs in 1943 to test the nuclear bombs. And of course, we have the crash in 1947 in Roswell, which is just, I believe, northeast of this location. Well, you could tell Socorro, Mexico, is actually just on the top left, outside the radius of the Trinity test site. Any nuclear fallout, even testing the dirt in that area would be perfect. We have had cases where we know the entities somehow come out of crafts and take a dirt sample. So this could have been maybe something even similar to this. We don't know. But interestingly enough, there's been at least 3 cases within the vicinity of this nuclear test site around the same time that they tested these bombs that we know for a fact this has something to do with the UFO case. And we now know that to be true because the U.S. Is having a hard time with their ships right now that are nuclear powered because they're being followed by UAPs everywhere. And it seems the nuclear power it attracts them. And from what I could understand from Lou Elizondo, they've even baited some of these crafts, like by having some sort of nuclear device on a craft just to bring them in. And supposedly it works. So there's a connection there. And I'm not quite sure what it is, but I don't know if it's their technology being disrupted by ours, or if they're just saying, hey, you guys are going to destroy yourselves. But then again, if there's that many civilizations, why do they care about us? And why would they try to intervene? But it seems like they are for some reason. So that's the interesting part of that. Katie, we haven't heard from you in a little bit. You have a question?
I want to ask Ben what he thinks of, this disclosure movement. And Jason mentioned those hearings. I think you get to be there, right, Jason?
I'm going to be there.
That's
I
exciting.
bought my airplane ticket. I'm going.
That's exciting. What do you think about that, Ben? I mean, are we gonna hear in our lifetimes?
Yeah, my opinion is not real popular among disclosure people. I just don't believe disclosure is going to happen unless it's forced. And there's a couple of reasons for that. The government has been lying for 80 years. So they'd have to come out and say, we've been lying about Roswell, we've been lying to everybody for a long time. We've actually, made people almost go crazy by telling them they're full of crap, of what they report. If you have your own protective government saying there's craft flying around in restricted airspace, possibly abducting people, we don't know where they come from, we don't know how to stop them, but it's okay, don't worry about it. That's just not a conversation they're going to have. They've lied for so long that they'd have to backtrack so much. And the fact that some of the whistleblowers now are getting death threats, just like what happened at Roswell, tells me that the secret at the very top is either so terrible or so astounding that they don't ever want it to come out. I've told this story before, but there's a gentleman that was former military. I won't say who he is. He was able to audit all the NSA, DIA, and all these intelligence agencies. And he personally told us, Tony was there with me when he said, he didn't say it, he nodded his head, but he said when he looked at all these organizations, he wanted to see who was at the very top, who was running things. And I said, what did you find? He went like this. I said, you telling me that aliens are at the top of the food chain here?
Mm-hmm.
And he just did that again. And so, in his capacity to see all these organizations, he came to the conclusion that they were kind of running the show. And I don't think they're here to save us or anything like that. Maybe they have some empathy, but maybe it's just a lesson in how civilizations destroy themselves. Or, the whole thing with disclosure is with these new witnesses that have come forward, and David Grosh has already said he's had death threats. That secret is so tightly held. It's just like what Dwight Eisenhower warned us about. There's going to be so many black projects that are so separated from everything else. They won't talk to each other. Nobody knows what everybody else has, and they don't answer to anybody. There's billions and billions of dollars, probably trillions of dollars that go into black projects that Congress can't find out about. Nobody can ask the questions. Nobody's going to tell you. So I think that whatever the real secret is behind the UFOs that they're aware of, it's so bad they don't want to tell us. And they don't want to say we're helpless to, the fact that with the Tic Tac videos and all that, they're speculating it's China or Russia. That's ludicrous. If China or Russia had that type of technology, we'd be speaking Chinese right now. And so it's not a foreign adversary. It's definitely something from off world, but the very few people at the top that know what's going on, they'll take it to their deathbeds. And in the Roswell case, a lot of those guys, the generals that when they were retired and they would bring it up to them, they would freak out, start screaming, "Don't ask me about that," And there's several on film that just got so mad and never wanted to talk about it because they were threatened. And so when you have a secret that's so tightly held like that, the cat can't get out of the bag. It's way beyond the point where they could disclose it and make everybody feel good about it because there's nothing they can do about it. If this technology is even 1,000 years ahead of us, what are you going to say to the people? You can't say anything. And one of the reasons for that is the old War of the Worlds 1939 broadcast, Orson Welles, which they kept cutting in. It was a broadcast of the Martian invasion. They kept cutting in saying this is a play, but people didn't hear that part. People freaked out all over the country and went out and started shooting at things in the sky and burning their house down and getting in their cars and driving away because they thought an actual alien invasion was coming. And the Brookings Institute has that in their report as one of the reasons why you can't say that there's UFOs here from other worlds because of the 1939 broadcast and the reactions that happened from that.
So when you say that the secret would be so bad that they couldn't talk about it, what sort of secret could be so bad?
Well, what if we are genetically related to them? What if they did alter the DNA of chimpanzees and gorillas or whatever to create human beings to mine gold or whatever? That's kind of a ludicrous thing. But what if they are the angels in the Bible? What if they are what a lot of these stories in the Bible are written about were just aliens? That's something that a lot of people couldn't handle.
Because it
And
would
I
like
think,
destroy their religion? Is that the idea? It would just
well, yeah,
upset
just the
the
fact that we're
worldview?
not in charge. The one thing that would freak out, especially the people on the top of the government, is if they don't want to tell people they're not in charge. And so, what if they have their own agenda and want to run things the way they want to run things? What if the plan is one big experiment or one big penal colony of lost souls? I mean, there's so many scenarios you could think of that would be so bad that whatever it is, even if it's just the fact that they can't understand or stop it, I don't know. I just think that it could be a terrible, terrible thing, or it just could be they just don't want to put that out there and have to, deal with the ramifications of religion and, the collapse of any monetary systems that we find out that, we're not in charge of anything and there's nothing you can do about it. That would freak a lot of people out.
So in my head, there's like kind of two categories of bad possible truths. One is the ones that are bad just because they kind of upset the current way that we see the world, but they're not really bad in the end. Like if we find out that the angels in the Bible are just extraterrestrials, like that upsets people who have that particular worldview, but it's not a worse world to live in, maybe. But then there are other truths that could really make the world worse. Like if, I don't know, we're all destined to go to hell or something. I don't know how that would like figure into the ET scenario, but most of the time when I hear people speculate about why truths would be withheld, it's the first kind. It's like they don't want to upset a particular worldview, but the truths themselves aren't really that bad. And it sounds like kind of the same things that you're saying are of that sort. Like if when you think about this, you think about the truths that might be hidden from us. They're bad because they upset us. They're bad because they kind of put us in an existential crisis, like finding out that nobody's in charge. But that's like already the truth. Like nobody is running everything. The world's too complex, and there's nobody kind of at the driving the steering wheel or whatever. And we all have to kind of reckon with that in the end. Do you think that that's like when you reflect on all of these big issues, the sort of possible ET contact thing, how do you reckon with the like what's the hard truth that you've had to reckon with, and how has it changed the way that you see the world and kind of relate to your own interior life?
Well, for a civilization to survive itself, survive its atomic age, survive killing themselves and travel into space, you have to get beyond what we're mired in right now, killing each other. So to travel space, you've probably solved a lot of these social problems. You're probably a lot more enlightened, a lot more conscious. But whether or not they give a damn about us is a whole nother thing. What if there are multiple civilizations and one civilization is a warlike alien race and they want to just take over the world, but this other civilization is stopping them and keeping them in check? What if that's the secret? I mean, these are scenarios you just don't want to hear about. I think that if there is, you can't discount like a militaristic type of alien race out there, but I would hope that if there are ETs visiting here, that some of them are highly conscious and empathetic and want to do the right thing. I don't know if they have a prime directive like on Star Trek where you can't interfere with any other planets, can't steer them one way or the other. But, what if they're just here to observe us to see if we survive ourselves? What if this is a lesson that they're bringing students in these craft to say, here's a planet that's eventually going to blow itself up. This is how it happens. Watch them through history.
Okay.
That could be a terrible secret that nobody wants to hear also. So the fact that I believe there's other types of aliens out there that have come here, to me, that's kind of an exciting thing. We haven't been taken over. There's been no Independence Day. There's not been anything like that. So that tells me they do have some type of moral structure and seem to not want, if you can travel space, you're not here to take our resources. You can get the resources. There's an asteroid that apparently has, 100 billion trillion pounds of gold on it, that if we captured it, gold would be cheaper than dirt. So I don't think they're here to take any resources from us or this genetic material or anything like that. I think there's a whole nother reason. And whether it's good or bad, I'm hoping it's good. It just,
What's the reason? Do you have what do you think? Don't hold back.
well, I think that it could just be a lesson. It could just be observing us because they've visited other worlds that have not survived or have survived. So they're trying to see how we do it. Do we come out of this alive? Do we kill ourselves? Do we go out into space with military vehicles and become like the Klingons or something? I think that it's a learning experience. It's a way to observe a civilization, to see the mistakes they made and the mistakes you can avoid, and what's the right way to do this, what's the wrong way to do this. Because right now this planet is a mess. There's never been a time we don't have wars, and it's just sad that we can't come to a group consciousness where we really focus on the things that are much more important. And they've probably done that to be able to travel the stars and come here. So they probably look at us like the ugly stepchildren that nobody wants to talk about because we're just not getting a grip on what life is supposed to be about.
Yeah.
Just makes
I
you
came
wonder,
across
Thornton.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No,
I came across a document and some of these boxes and boxes of stuff I'm going through, and it was quite terrifying, not to scare everybody, but they said the truth about some of the alien contact is so terrifying that they don't want to let it out because they talk about these black box soul recyclers, and basically we're cattle and food for some of these ET races. There's not a darn thing we can do about it. And if people found out the truth of that we're just kind of going through the cycle until we're gobbled up by ET. I was like, what is this? Anyway, I hope that's not true. Can I ask a quick question? Really quick. Is that okay? This book you mentioned, Socorro Saucer in the Pentagon Pantry. Ray Stanford, you got to know him well. I was just curious if you can talk a little bit about Ray and who he is and what he's like in person, because you've spent a lot of time with him.
Yeah, Ray's a fascinating person. I believe he's about 88 now. Sorry for the cough.
Oh, is he? Wow. Okay.
But Ray never went to college, but he speaks probably 5 or 6 languages.
Wow.
He has one of the best meteorite collections in the world. The Smithsonian is constantly bugging him. They visit his house. A lot of scientists, a lot of PhDs go to his house to see his meteorite collections, his artifacts he has from all over the world. He gets online and buys a lot of these things. But one time when Tony and I were over there, we got to hold a piece of Mars, a piece of the moon, and several other meteorites. And when impacts hit like the moon or Mars, it does eject material that ends up getting caught in the Earth and falls to Earth. And Ray's piece of the Mars rock has the same little almost segmented bacteria that was supposedly that Clinton announced that life was found. But Ray is he was the person of the week on TV. His wife was on the Hubble telescope. She was part of one of the engineers on that. So out at Goddard, Ray used to eat lunch out there. And when he was sitting, this is like 10, 12 years ago, he noticed on the ground, the sandstone, that there was maybe some marks there. And what Ray discovered at Goddard was 44 dinosaur footprints on this large slab that had been probably petrified poop and whatever. That was millions of years old. The only dinosaur footprints at the time that were ever found inside the Beltway. They did a big excavation, pulled this thing out, gave him a copy that he put it in his basement, which I found a extra footprint. He said he was going to name after me, but I think he forgot about that. But it just tells you he's so good at observing the sky and the ground that he found these footprints, and it was an amazing discovery, one of the greatest paleontological discoveries, of the 21st century. But Ray is a fascinating guy. He speaks multiple languages, like I said. He knew all the players. He knew Adamski. He knew a lot of the Chandlers, and he was a Chandler himself. And he kind of said he was full of it back then. But he's a sharp guy. There's some videos on YouTube where he's with Jeffrey Mishaw talking about his footage, and he's captured a lot of Super 8, 16 millimeter footage of UFOs. He always had a camera around his neck. He's been involved in this. He was invited by Dr. Hynek down to the Socorro site in '64. He was one of the first people to come from NICAP to investigate that case. And his book is excellent. Our book is just a follow-up with new information to his book. But Ray's a fascinating guy. And if you go to his house, he has probably, I don't want to say, but he has so many cool things there that you could spend hours and hours just looking at the stuff. He found one of the things that fascinates me. There was this game that was played in South America where this large disc was built, and these smaller discs, you had to throw it so it went into this little slot in the side of the larger disc, kind of like an ancient civilization mimicking a mothership with a little craft going back in it. And he's found interesting things like that. He'll buy something, this guy doesn't know what he's selling. This is actually made out of a meteorite, and so he's got this incredible collection. And the Smithsonian has an area dedicated to him, some of his dinosaur finds. He's got a lot of dinosaur bones, a lot of footprints and sandstone. This is a brontosaurus, this is a pterodactyl, and just an amazing guy. He self-taught himself, but just one of the classic. He was called a national treasure by a former MUFON director, and he is. For ufology, Ray was there. He knew Phil Klass. Phil Klass actually came to his house and told Ray after he saw some of his data, he says, I think you got something here, but you'll never get me to say it in public.
That's cool.
Classic ufology sentence, isn't it? You're onto something, but I'll never admit it. Awesome. Ben, thank you so much for coming on UAP Studies podcast. There's an event coming soon that you and Katie are taking part of. Do you want to talk to us quickly about that?
Yeah, it's called the Alien Exploration Conference. It's in Albuquerque, New Mexico, April 4th through the 6th. in 2025. And Katie, Tony, and I were all speaking with a really good lineup. They've got a lot of interesting people there. Greg Bishop, I haven't seen in a while. He's a friend that I've met and talked to several times. But they put together a really good group of people. And this is the first time that Tony and I will get to present the Socorro case in New Mexico where it actually happened. And hopefully some of Lonnie's family is going to attend.
Be cool.
His daughter said that she would come and and listen. So I'm really excited to present this case there, and hopefully some people will come up to us afterwards and say, "Hey, I got a story to tell you," because that's happened every time we've gone to Socorro. Somebody comes up and goes, "I'll tell you what I know, or what I saw, or what my dad saw, or what he knew, or what Lonnie told him." So it's looking forward to that.
Nice.
Fun.
And Katie, you're speaking at this event as well?
I am. I'll be speaking on the Colorado Ranch. So per usual.
Per
But,
use.
yeah, I'm
And
looking
then-
per usual. Looking forward to it though. It's gonna be a great time. I think Linda Howe's gonna be there, Richard Doty, Charles Hall.
A lot of the
trying to
big
think who
names.
else. Yeah, so it should be a really nice time. Yeah, good
Nice.
time of year too. So I hope to see people out there.
Well, spring is a good time. And then there's what,
Yeah.
Contact in the Desert in May. So it's like April, May. There's a bunch of events that are taking place for sure. Again, Ben, thank you so much. Michael, Katie, thank you for joining us today.
Glad to be here.
I
Thank you.
learned quite a bit on the Socorro case because I did not know that there was a bunch of other people that had witnessed this. I did know that it flew over the car. So this is why it's good to talk to investigators, because there's a bunch of details that, for instance, I did not know that Betty and Barney Hill had a dog in a car the entire time. I did not know that till just recently. I'm like, what? They had a dog? That's crazy. Now I love the story even more. But this is a sort of research that I love because obviously it's an older case, but it's a solid case, and it includes police officers, which I think a lot of the cases, I mean, what, 35% of the cases involve police officers of some sort. So I think they should be trained a lot more on these sort of weird situations they may end up in. But, I had two police officers almost laugh at me when I asked them, like, what are the protocols? And they're like, ha, ha, ha. I'm like, you don't know what I know because you would be laughing so much. But so, Ben, thank you so much. Is there a website people could find you on, man?
Yeah, I'm the UFO guys on Facebook. So there's two pages. They somehow separated into two UFO guys on Facebook. So there's two of them. Also, the book, this is a hard copy of the book, but the book is on Amazon, Not of This World, the Socorro 1964 UFO Landing with Humanoids. So you can get it online at Amazon and read it digitally. Yeah, if anybody wants to reach out, just go to the UFO guys on Facebook and shoot me a message.
Awesome. You keep doing what you're doing, Ben. We appreciate
Yes.
it. And please come back on the podcast again.
Yeah, anytime.